الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. All praise and thanks are due solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Chases peace, blessings and salutations upon our master and exemplar Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, students of deen, hufad al-Quran, those who are joining us here today in person, as well as those joining us online around the world. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. We welcome you to this presentation today. Spiritual benefits of giving, a seminar focusing on charity from the Islamic paradigm. And our intention hereby is, number one, that we do everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Number two, that we benefit ourselves and yourselves with learning and teaching about a very sacred aspect of Islam. Number three, that we remind ourselves of things that we may have forgotten. Number four, that we practice that which we already knew but have been neglectful of. And finally, that we take the benefit, whatever there may be in today's presentation, and we not only keep it for ourselves, but we also share it with others, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. With that said, we commence with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha and perhaps some salawat, so as to provide some spiritual nourishment for our souls, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Islam is in fact a way of life, and thereby it governs and guides every major aspect of our life, major and minor. And if we were to analyze the major aspects of our lives, we can reach approximately 5. We have our theology, our belief. Then we have our physical worship, our practice. We have our financial lives, economic transactions. We have our social lives, meaning our interactions with one another. And we also have our spiritual development. If we analyze the pillars of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam, it's very easy to see that Islam is in fact a way of life. Because even the 5 pillars, the fundamentals of faith, they cover those aspects already. Often, when we engage with fiqh, we learn about our physical ibadat. But fiqh does not only govern our physical ibadat, it also governs every other aspect of our lives. Zakah and charity, or zakah and sadaqah, these are chapters within fiqh that deal with a financial aspect of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it also covers, in part, our relationship with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For we find ourselves either on the giving end or on the receiving end in many cases. In today's seminar on the spiritual benefits of giving, we will cover, by Maulana Muhammad Ka, connecting to Allah through giving. And essentially this will be the inner dimensions of the aspects of zakah and sadaqah. But before we get to that, we're actually going to cover receiving and giving for Him, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which in essence is going to be an overview, a brief and basic overview of the chapter on zakah. At least the most relevant segments of the chapter on zakah. And this will serve a number of purposes. Number one, it will be a refresher for those who have already learned about this. Number two, it will allow us to learn if we have not already done so. But I'd like to add the caveat that we cannot rely on a very basic seminar, a very short presentation, to really study the chapter on zakah, right? Kitabuz zakah. This is an overview, and from that overview, hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, we can benefit. And then we have my good friend and colleague, Dr. Maulana Yusuf Patel, who's going to be addressing the topic, You Are What You Give. So with that said, we commence bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And as I said, we are starting with the second title on that particular poster over there. So that's this one, receiving and giving for Him. On this one slide, you have an overview of the entire Kitabuz Zakah. You have an overview of the entire Kitabuz Zakah. So take a moment to read through that, and then we will look at specific elements within Kitabuz Zakah bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And some of you may see certain things that are familiar, and there may be certain things that are completely unfamiliar. So we will cover some of them here, but if you have a question about something that we don't cover, we welcome your interaction and your participation, inshallah. And along with that, I'd also like to say that we're a nice, small group here in person, so feel free to raise your hand at any point and ask a question, or add your contribution to the discussion here. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. We would most certainly welcome that, inshallah. طيب. So from the top we have zakah, a definition. What is zakah? Who must pay zakah? And what is the hawl, the zakah year? That's the first discussion. The second discussion, what is zakatable? What is zakatable? In other words, what are those things upon which we need to pay zakah? Especially considering the fact that we realize it is a pillar of Islam. There's shahada, there's salah, there's zakah, right? So it's important that we understand what are we supposed to pay zakah on. Then there's a specific category of zakah, zakatul fitr, right? Which is attached to Eidul Fitr. We won't look at that entire section, but we will look at the highlighted segments thereof. So what is zakatable? Is there anyone here who owns livestock? Is there anyone here who has farms and has food crops? Or who has mined wealth and Bitcoin doesn't count? Or who has treasure troves that they discovered? So those are very specific categories. The categories that would affect us most are gold, silver and money, as well as trading goods. But trading goods is also a specific category. So even that we won't cover in great detail here. But for now, it's an overview of what is zakatable. Zakatul fitr, right? The fitra as we call it, that's something that is generally discussed by our ulama during the month of Ramadan, which is coming up very shortly. May Allah allow us to reach the month of Ramadan. But under there we see 8 categories. That's important for us here today because that directly correlates with everything else in zakah. Remember, the topic is giving and receiving. So these are the designated recipients as stipulated in the Quran. And then you have voluntary zakah. Voluntary zakah is sadaqah, as we refer to it, right? We speak about its virtues, the recommended, the offensive, the permissible, and impermissible rulings surrounding it. It's a beautiful chapter, and we may learn a few things there that would surprise us. Over to the other side of the slide, we have a specific mention of the 8 categories. There's the poor, the fuqara, there's the needy, the masakin. There are those employed to collect zakah, وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, those employed to collect zakah. Then there are those whose hearts are one, الْمُؤَلَّفَةُ قُلُوبِهِمْ, those whose hearts are one. Then there are al-gharimin, those who are in debt. Then there is in the cause of Allah, fi sabilillah. And finally the wayfarer or the traveler. Those are the 8 categories of zakah. And we proceed bi'idhnillahi ta'ala with the presentation. Are there any questions so far? All good? Is there 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Which one am I missing? Those whose hearts are one, those in debt, in the cause of Allah, the wayfarer. Which one am I missing? Let's see. الفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم الغارمين في سبيل الله وابن السبيل. We'll check on that slide now. Let's do that. Here's the ayah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب. There we go. Slaves. The emancipation of slaves. والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم. So shukran for that. I missed one out on the introductory slide. We'll add that there, inshallah. So what's the definition of zakah? This is a sacred law definition of zakah, taken from Al-Iqna' fi Halli Al-Fadhi Abi Shuja', written by Khatib Al-Shirbini, the great Shafi'i jurist. In sacred law, I think Maulana Muhammad would probably deal with the linguistic origin of the word zakah, which means to purify and how it correlates. But in sacred law, it is the name for a particular amount of property that must be paid to certain kinds of recipients, those 8 that we just mentioned, under the conditions mentioned below, meaning in this chapter, and it is a pillar of Islam. It is called zakah from growth and purity. Why? Because one's wealth grows through the blessings of giving it and the du'as of those who receive it. Right? And there's actually a specific sunnah du'a for anyone who receives for the sake of Allah, whether it be zakah or sadaqah, that recipient should ideally make for the one who gives. We will learn about that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then because it purifies, zakah purifies. It purifies your nafs, and it purifies the wealth that you have kept with you. So you're giving some away, but the remainder becomes pure because of what you had given away. It purifies its giver of sin, and it extols him by testifying to the genuineness of his faith. Have you ever wondered, what has sadaqah got to do with its root letters? Sadaqah, the root letters are sad, dal, qaf, which spells sidq, which means truthfulness. Right? You ever heard the English expression, put your money where your mouth is? Put your money where your mouth is. Because when you give charity, when you give sadaqah, it is a testification of the faith that is beheld within your heart. Because you spend, humans, we've got in ourselves, we've got this thing called shuh, the selfishness. We are, like other creatures, we also have this survival instinct. So to give goes against that instinct. To give is to prefer others over oneself, which is part of what makes us human, right? So sadaqah, when you give a sadaqah, it's like you're giving, and especially sadaqah because it's voluntary, you're giving out of your own free will. It's a testification of the iman that you have in your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to yourself as well, right? So that's a technical definition. Overview. Zakah is obligatory. It is a fard. It is a fard upon every Muslim, male, female, adult or child. Which might be unusual because generally when we speak about a child, we say that they are غير مكلف. So how can it be fard upon a child? You see, zakah is a what type of ibadah? Physical or financial? It is a financial ibadah. So the child is able to own money as much as an adult is able to own money. Right? There are certain different rulings in relation to how they may deal with that money, but they still can possess ownership of the money. So it is compulsory upon the wealth of the child. Right? It is compulsory upon the wealth of the child. It is obligatory for anyone who has possessed a zakah payable amount, which we refer to as the nisab. If you haven't heard that term before, it's a very important term. Right? Become familiar with it. Nisab. That's how it's spelled in Arabic as well. And it becomes obligatory when you have that nisab for a full lunar year. For a full lunar year. So if you have the zakah payable amount, and you own that amount, and it doesn't go less than that amount, for an entire lunar year, the moment that lunar year passes, zakah is owed on that money. طيب? Now, there's a long discussion as to how we calculate the nisab and what it's based on and so forth. But the basic calculation or the end result of the calculation is what you see on the slide. Gold, the gold nisab, which is what many contemporary jurists, including my late teacher, Mawlana Taha Karan rahimahullah ta'ala, ruled upon, is that we should go with the gold standard of nisab as opposed to the silver standard. What am I talking about? What is nisab? Nisab is the amount of wealth that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you have it, and you have it for a year, you must pay zakah. But they didn't have rands and dollars. What did they have? They had gold and they had silver. So there's a specific nisab for gold and there's a specific nisab for silver. But now what happens when you move over to a currency that is no longer attached to either gold or silver? It's a currency to itself. Right? That's a very technical legal discussion. But for the sake of making matters simple, most scholars have indicated that the zakah payer can choose to use the nisab of gold or silver. What I just said a moment ago is that many reliable contemporary jurists have said, no, we should use only the nisab of gold. Only the nisab of gold. Now, currently, the nisab of gold is 90,315 rands. So that means a person needs to own that amount of money without it diminishing lower than that amount for an entire lunar year before zakah becomes obligatory on that person. Which is also something that would mean fewer people would pay zakah, right? So this is why those who prefer the silver nisab or advise for the silver nisab, they would recommend using that because it's better for the poor. The poor would reach. But if you look at the silver nisab again, the silver nisab, last night I worked it out at 7,695 rand. That's not a very big number. So that means far more people would pay zakah, and somebody who has that amount of money for a year isn't exactly affluent in today's standards, wouldn't you say? So even though they're not technically affluent, they too would have to pay zakah. So in the sense that it's going to be more beneficial for the recipients, but far more people would be giving zakah, even though they may not actually be able to afford it, right? So there are these options, and this is a sort of a modern problem that we have because we no longer use gold and silver, right? Both rulings apply, both rulings would be valid, but I would of course advise what my teacher advised because I believe his fatwa to be of good reasoning, and Mawlana Muhammad may perhaps comment on that later inshallah ta'ala. The guardian of a child or an insane person is obliged to pay zakah from their property. So the child doesn't pay his own zakah. The guardian takes responsibility for that. And it is a sin for the guardian not to pay the zakah due on their property. And when the child or insane person becomes legally responsible by reaching puberty or becoming sane, he is obliged to pay the amount that his guardian neglected to pay. So he owes that money, right? Zakah is exacted proportionately. In other words, it's 2.5% on any amount over those minimums that we just described, whether it is gold or silver or coins or in any other form that is used as wealth. And this also applies to jewelry if it is for unlawful purposes, right? Gold jewelry for unlawful purposes, but not for lawful purposes. And this is a common question. The jewelry that you wear, that you make use of, zakah is not to be paid on that. This is gold that is stored, gold that is extra, it's just there, or for unlawful purposes, and Allah knows best. There is no zakah on gold or silver jewelry that is for permissible use. طيب. Now, we've already recited the ayah that indicate who should receive zakah. The 8 categories are known. The 2 that we need to be most familiar with are the fuqara and the masakin, the poor and the needy. Bismillah. Bismillah. Okay, it's a good question. So you're asking about if you choose the gold nisab as your standard, you don't owe zakah. But if you were to choose the silver nisab, you would owe zakah, right? So because you're going with the gold standard, you're not paying zakah. Is that what you're saying? So is there no sin upon you based on that? No. Because these fatwa are independent of one another. These rulings are independent of one another. You choose your path, and the rules relating to that choice would apply to you, and not the other rules. And Allah knows best. It is obligatory to distribute one zakah among 8 categories of recipients. There are lots of details to this, meaning that zakah goes to none besides them. So zakah, as opposed to sadaqah, cannot just be used for anything and everything. It is specific, which is why an organization or a recipient of zakah, those who distribute it, would ask, is this zakah money? Or they would have a separate account because it's zakah money. It needs to be used in a particular way. So that's the important point there. In the Hanafi school, there are certain different rulings, and sometimes we would allude to that. So for example, it is valid for the giver to distribute his zakah to all of the 8 categories, or some of them, or confine himself to just one of them. And most people would practice on this ruling because we don't go out of our way to go and find if there are those other recipients. However, I would suggest that we don't always just take the easy way out, because there's a divine wisdom in why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the Shafi'i madhab, wants us to distribute to all 8 categories. Now, again, slavery doesn't exist. So obviously, that's not going to apply. But how often don't we hear about people who are stuck? They were on a journey, they're here now, they can't go anywhere. That's the wayfarer. How often do they actually receive zakah, even though they are one of the 8 categories? What about new Muslims? We're living in a minority situation. right? There may be those who qualify under that particular category, al-mu'allafatu qulubuhum. But that's a ruling that people go to because of ease. Otherwise, you would have to go and find those 8 categories. And Allah knows best. What does it mean to be poor? So this is important because sometimes you may even find yourself in a difficult position and you are wondering, do I qualify as a recipient of zakah, yes or no? So basically, the fuqara, they are those who, they do not have enough to suffice themselves because they either have no money at all or they have some, but it isn't enough for their needs. They are unable to earn. They don't have enough to sustain themselves and their family members, their dependents, for their probable life expectancy. So they're living in impoverished conditions. If it were distributed over the probable amount of remaining time, then they wouldn't have enough to last them, right? Insufficient means, in this case, less than half of what he actually needs. And then the next point, all of which applies as well to the needs of those he must support. So you don't only look at the individual, but you look at the dependents. A mechanic's tools or a scholar's books are not sold or considered part of his money since he needs them to earn a living. That's a subtle point. But you can't say, no, those people, they can't get zakah because they have tools that they could sell, right? Because their tools, they require their tools to earn a living. So you can't say, no, because they have tools, they can't get zakah. Then you have the masakeen. The masakeen are similar to the poor, except that they have money, but their money doesn't meet the requirements. So they're not completely poor. They're not completely dependent on others, but what they have will not suffice them for their needs. Unable to earn his living by work suitable to him, such as a noble profession befitting him, given his health and social position. So for example, a scholar, if a scholar is in dire straits, one cannot say, but what's wrong with him? Can't he do gardening? Can't he go and work as a street sweeper and then earn in that way? Right? How is he saying that he can't find a job? You with me? So as opposed to work unbefitting him. Then the second point on the slide is, or is able to earn his living, but to do so would keep him too busy to engage in attaining knowledge of sacred law. So students of Deen specifically, Imam Nawawi says, if able to earn a living at work, befitting him, except that he is engaged in attaining knowledge of some subject in sacred law, such that turning to earning a living would prevent the acquisition of this knowledge, then it is permissible for him to take zakah, because the attainment of knowledge is a communal obligation, a fard kifaya. Though zakah is not lawful for someone able to earn a living who cannot acquire knowledge, even if he lives at the school. What we have just mentioned is the most correct and well-known position, as Sheikh Nuh Hamim Kala gives his own tarjih there, his own preference there. People whose needs are met by the expenditures of those who are obliged to support them. So there's a lady, she's poor. She's very poor. She's in need. But her husband is very affluent. So can you give your zakah to that lady? So this is what this is talking about. People whose needs are met by the expenditures of those who are obliged to support them, such as their husbands or families, they are not given zakah. Though it is permissible for a third party to give zakah to such a dependent by virtue of the dependent's belonging to some category other than the poor. So they may qualify from a different perspective. So if you have an aunt and she's struggling personally, but the one providing for her is not. He's affluent and he can provide for her sufficiently. Right? That should suffice her needs, and Allah knows best. Those short of money, the second category that I mentioned, the masakeen, they are people who they have something to spend for their needs, but it isn't enough. So people who work can still receive zakah if the money that they earn from work doesn't fulfill their needs. The considerations applicable to the poor person also apply to someone short of money about if there's work befitting them. You consider the social sort of status and background. If there's no work befitting them, you can't expect them to go to work. That's sort of unbefitting them, and Allah knows best. How much are the poor given? If there's enough funds available, they should be given what would suffice them for the rest of their lives. So it's not like a slavat. Culturally, you would say, oh, give him, no, that's too much. You can't give him that much because that's only 10,000. You can't give him 10,000. That's too much. We need to give it to other people also. Why not give 10,000 people one? People think like that. But the person is supposed to be given, if there's enough funds, enough to suffice him for the rest of his life. Scholars also opine that if not for the rest of his life, then for the rest of the year, like for a full year. So you can see the point is genuine poverty relief, not hunger relief, genuine poverty relief. The idea is we want to get them out of the situation that they find themselves in and hopefully never to return back to it again. Another common misconception that I'd like to add in here is that when it comes to zakah money, one cannot, even fitrah, right, Eid al-Fitr, one cannot say, look here, this is my zakah money, let me make a pot of food and give it to the poor. Because zakah belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you. If they want to make a pot of food with it, فَبِهَا وَنَعِمَتْ. But you can't take their money, do something with their money, and then give it to them in that way. The moment a lunar year passes on the money that zakah is supposed to be paid on, that money no longer belongs to the owner, or the previous owner, I should say. That money belongs to the poor. It needs to be given as soon as possible because you're actually sitting with somebody else's money, and Allah knows best. The other categories, I'm just going to brush over. Zakah workers, right? There's a lot of detail that needs to go in there, but for now, we will just brush over these. Those whose hearts are to be reconciled. Specifically, people who embrace Islam and they could be made stronger in their iman if we win them over, we win their hearts over. There's a category for that. Then those purchasing their freedom, because Islam encourages emancipation of slaves. Those in debt. Those in debt. Briefly, a person who incurs debts in order to settle trouble between two people. Such a person is given zakah. So let's say there's an argument, there's bloodshed, there's some problem between two families, and somebody puts themselves in debt to resolve the situation, pay what was owed between people, etc. Such a person deserves zakah, even if he is affluent. Even if he is affluent, which shows the importance of sulh and taking responsibility for that. Number two, a person who incurs debts to support himself or his dependents is given zakah if he is poor, but not if he is affluent. So if you are in dire straits, you are sort of living under the breadline and you take a loan, right? And that loan is to support yourself and your dependents, then that would mean that you are deserving of zakah. Thirdly, someone who stands as a guarantee for the debt of another is also deserving of zakah. Again, all of these require further detail if it applies to you. Now this category, those fighting for Allah, in the ayah it says, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, in the path of Allah. There's ikhtilaf around this particular category. The original meaning of this category is that it refers to those who are literally fighting in the cause of Allah, for a legitimate fighting cause. And regardless of their status in life and their economic background, they would be zakatable. You should be able to give them zakah. Many contemporary scholars, however, such as, there are many, such as Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi and others, have extended this category to other avenues of deen, right? So if you hear differences of opinion in relation to who can receive zakah, it's probably going to be around this category. So some would say, no, zakah cannot be given to a masjid, And others would say, yes, it can be given to a masjid. Why? Because they would argue whether that falls part of this category or not. طيب? The overwhelming majority of classical scholars, however, they limit this only to those who are actually fighting in the path of Allah and not to other means. So what's the idea behind the contemporary fatwa saying that it is permissible to give it to other things, other causes of deen? The idea is, many of these categories that we have already gone over, they don't exist anymore. But the needs of the ummah have expanded into other avenues. And these are genuine needs and they need to be catered for, they need to be given attention. And therefore, they've extended it in that way. And Allah knows best, right? Travelers needing money, we mentioned this briefly. I won't go into any detail with that. And then we will conclude my first session now, inshallah, with this slide. And then I'll finish the voluntary charity in the second session. Paying zakah to recipients, it is recommended to give zakah to one's relatives, other than those one is obliged to support. A husband can't give his zakah to his wife. He must give her money. He must nafaqah, right? A man can't give his zakah to his mother. No, she's your mother. You must look after her, mathalan, right? But relatives who you are not obliged to support, relatives who the Sharia does not oblige you to support, they should be the first on your list to receive zakah from you. Because there it will serve multiple functions, right? Ibda biman ta'ul. Start at home. They say charity begins at home. It does, right? And by the way, we will talk about that in voluntary charity. The money you spend on your family for the sake of Allah is considered sadaqah in Islam, which is fantastic, especially for men, because they often spend a lot on their families. The ladies, they don't even need to be pleased at that statement, because any money that a woman spends on her family, remember, she's not obliged to spend anything on anyone, even herself. So she's winning from the get-go. Allah knows best. It is recommended to distribute zakah to recipients in proportion to their needs. So if there's limited funds, and person A needs 100 dirhams, and person B needs 200, then give person B more than you give person A, right? It's not permissible to give zakah to a non-Muslim or to someone whom one is obliged to support, such as a wife or family member. We've covered that. And then finally, it is not valid for one to give zakah to a poor person with conditions, right? On condition that he gives it back to you to pay off the debt that he owes you, for example, right? That's not allowed. Though if you give the person zakah, hoping that they will pay you because they owe you, that's fine. Okay, so that concludes my first session. The second session will cover voluntary charity, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And shukran for listening. Any questions? I'll give you a second to decide if you have questions, inshallah. It's okay, because any questions you would have asked at this point, I would have deferred them to Maulana Muhammad anyways. So, Bismillah. Jazakumullah khairan. We'll see each other in the next session, inshallah. Sorry, Maulana, let me just sort something out here quickly. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. How's everybody doing today? Alhamdulillah. Good. So, I was given the task of looking through the esoteric parts of charity. So I think we are very clear and familiar. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. I think we very clear in terms of the exoteric parts of giving charity, and the impact that that has is very clear. You approach a person in need, you give them a little of the lot that you have, and you see the benefit thereof. What we would like to discuss would be the esoteric, in other words, the spiritual benefits of giving. And they are quite apparent. So I think to a large degree, my presentation is very simple and very straightforward, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm simply going to latch onto one verse of the Holy Quran. So I'm going to give you a basic explanation and a breakdown of the verse and how that verse actually explains to us. So it's a verse, I'm just going to expound on a verse that explains to us the spiritual benefit of giving. So there's a verse in the Holy Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's given a command. The benefit of that would be generally Sadaqah in this verse arguably could refer to zakah, which Mullah Irshad was speaking about. So the collection of zakah, whose responsibility is that? It's a state responsibility. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ is addressed, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, take of their wealth, exact of their wealth. Sadaqah / zakah. What is the benefit thereof? The benefit would basically be تُطَهِرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. So two things happen. There are two words and they appear to be synonymous, like having basically the same meaning, but there's a subtle yet profound difference between the two. So when you give charity, so the Prophet ﷺ is receiving the charity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you receive the charity, by means of it, what do? You make tathir, and also you make tazkiyah. Right? So firstly, we look at the concept of tathir, and our scholars explain that as at-takhliyatu min as-sayyi'at. So if you're familiar with the spiritual discourse, you'd find it is actually very simple. How do you refine yourself? How do you develop yourself spiritually? It's really about two things: removing the negative qualities and embellishing yourself with virtuous qualities. That's basically what spirituality is all about. Ridding yourself of the lesser qualities and embellishing, adopting higher qualities. For example, you want to be a better person, what do? Rid yourself of lying and embellishing yourself with speaking the truth, by way of example. So when you give charity, and this will be expounded upon later inshallah, what happens is, the first thing is, you're ridding yourself of a lesser quality. And if you think about it, it could very well be a niggardliness or miserliness. In giving, you rid yourself of that particular quality. But then what happens? At-tahliya, you're also embellishing yourself. And embellishment basically means that you're adopting a good quality. And both of these processes, it happens through you giving. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So basically in terms of the exposition, the explanation of this verse, our exegetes, those who explain the Quran to us, they say that what is intended by this ayah, by this verse, is the fact that sadaqah serves as an expiation. So you do something wrong, and you need to like reform, for lack of a better word. You did something wrong, you want to make up for the wrong. So that's called a kafara, an expiation. So when you give charity, it's an expiation, number one. And number two is, it's also a means of drawing a lot of goodness to you. So here we can see now the tathir and the tazkiyah. ridding yourself of lesser qualities and the embellishment. How does sadaqah rid you of a lesser quality? You may have committed a sin. You give something in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that serves as an expiation, and now you're free of that. I may have touched something which I was not supposed to. Okay. Oh, it's timed out. Okay. So what we find is that sadaqah, it is an expiation, number one, and also it is a means of drawing a lot of goodness to you. Okay. So I want to give you the context of this verse. Bismillah. That surah is Surah At-Tawbah. I'm coming to that right now, inshallah. No, it's not a problem. Feel free to ask any question anytime. So what is the context of this verse? I think for me, one of the most profound things for me in reading through this verse was the context. So this verse comes in Surah Tawbah. Now, one is the name of the surah, and the other one is the theme of the surah. It's not always that the name of the surah relates to the theme of the surah. And I think you can find a lot of examples. But in this instance, Surah At-Tawbah is the name of the surah, and it is also the theme of the surah. The theme, the whole idea of the surah is to talk about Tawbah. Now, what had happened here is that in Surah At-Tawbah, particularly towards the end. Okay, so let me just jump to the second one quickly. Part of Tawbah is to take remedial steps. So example, I borrowed 1,000 rands from you. I was supposed to pay you back within a certain time frame. I didn't. So now I'm making Tawbah. So I can't just go to the masjid and make Tawbah and not pay you. If I'm making Tawbah, it means I need to take remedial steps. Look, I delayed in repaying you, but now I need to take the 1,000 rands and repay you. So the name of the surah is Surah Tawbah. Seeking forgiveness, it also entails that you repent to Allah, but you also take steps to rectify the wrong that you did. Now, in this particular instance, Surah At-Tawbah, particularly towards the end, it deals with a particular phenomenon whereby certain of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they, because of, for lack of a better word, lethargy, dragging their feet, they were supposed to join the Prophet ﷺ on the Tabuk expedition. Busying themselves with this, that and the other, before they knew it, the Prophet ﷺ had already left. When the Prophet ﷺ came back, so they had already left, so what wrong did they do? Their wrong, you can basically put it into two words. Non-participation in the battle. In other words, all the Muslims had to go out to fight, and they basically stayed at home. So that's wrong. Number two is that when you join the jihad, then also you go with your person and also you go with your wealth. So they didn't spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in relation to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً. Take from their wealth sadaqah. So in other words, they were wrong to remain behind. And as a result of them remaining behind, they did not spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now they're making tawbah. So what is the remedial measure? You were supposed to spend, so spend now. So that's part of the remedy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The last hadith, I'm just going to very quickly skim through this, and I think it just highlights a sort of like a tangent point, but I think also a very important point. This narration says, those three persons who had remained behind, they actually came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, look, we didn't join the expedition, and the expedition has a cost. We now want to contribute towards that cost, although, in retrospect. So the Prophet ﷺ initially tells him, I've not been commanded, lam u'mar bidhalika, I've not been commanded to take wealth from you. And this is also very important. Yes, we're eager to, let's say we're an organization and we need funds. But now let's say we're unable, we're not legitimately allowed to accept zakah. Can I take zakah from you? No, I can't. The organization isn't licensed to take zakah, so I can't take zakah. So this is very important. Let's say, for example, I feel that you're really well off, man. As opposed to 2.5% zakah, I must take 5% zakah from you. I can't do that. So even when we exact charity from people, we can only do that in as far as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to do, and not beyond that. So that's an important consideration. But I want to come back to the point of what? These Sahaba, they are making tawbah. Part of the tawbah means they must sort of like take remedial steps. Importantly here, the remedial step is actually in giving. So what happens when you give? So we've already mentioned it in the verse. There's tathir, a purification. There's a, you rid yourself of the effects of that sin, and also you're enabled to do more good. That's basically what happens when you give zakah. Now, interestingly here, what happens is in the next Allah commands His Messenger. He says, "Khudh min amwalihim sadaqatan tutahhirhum wa tuzakkihim wa salli alayhim." So now a person is giving. So when you give, the Prophet ﷺ is told that make salah upon them. Now for us, interestingly, the word salah, when I say salah, like I'm checking the time now, and I'm concerned that the salah of Asr is going to come. So when you think of salah, what do you think about? That specific type of worship that begins with Allahu Akbar and finishes with salam. But interestingly, for those students, you would know that the word salah literally means dua. So when people give sadaqah and you receive sadaqah, then you must make dua for them. Now uniquely, the Prophet ﷺ, when he's commanded to make dua for them, so what do you have in your mind now? That the word salah means dua. So the Prophet ﷺ, he can choose to make any dua with any formula, isn't it? But what he does now is he makes dua for them, right? But he also uses the word salah in his dua. So when somebody would give him zakah, then the Prophet ﷺ would say, Allahumma salli ala ali fulan. Oh Allah, send salat upon that particular family. And salat actually means rahmah. So if you want to know what is the spiritual benefit of giving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do we find it to be? We find that if you give in the path of Allah, the person is going to make dua for you. And the dua in terms of the Quranic wording is salat, and salat means rahmah. So if you want rahmah, then give. So that's the spiritual benefit of giving. Now, the next one is like really sort of very amazing for me. And that is the word, so وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ, then inna salataka, indeed your salah, indeed your dua for them is what? Is sakan. So let us take some time and explore the word sakana. Sakana. Okay? So I think it's like fundamentally important for us to understand the word sakana, particularly in today's time when we are beset with so much challenges, and many of those challenges may be psychological challenges. And here basically what I want to say to you is that if you want sakan basically means peace. If you want peace, and who doesn't want peace? Then the manner of acquiring peace is through giving. That's basically. But now you say, okay, I want peace, I'm going to give. Fine. But I think it's important for us to understand exactly what peace means, or the word sakan. So, I think it was a week ago. I can't remember exactly which day it was, right? I speak under correction, I think it was a Sunday. And I went to Fishhook. And it was low tide. But I haven't seen the tide as low as I saw it then. And the sea was completely calm. Actually, if you looked at the sea, and like you're looking into the horizon, then the sea ends at some point, it's almost as if the sea is meeting the sky. The sky was grey, and the sea appeared to be a very calm grey, man. It was very, very, very calm. You with me? Now, if I'm sitting on the seashore, and I'm looking into the sea, and as a result of that experience, a sense of calmness and peace comes over me, then I can refer to the sea as a sakan. In other words, a sakan is that by means of which you gain peace and tranquility. Now, a related word, and doesn't apply in every instance, now just a joke. A related word is a wife is also referred to as sakan. Or a partner if you wanted to. You must make it gender neutral so we don't have cause to fight with one another. right? So partners, second, they are second to you. If you're sitting with your partner and you're having a decent conversation, right? And it's a means of peace to you. You feel relaxed. Then you can refer to your partner as a second. You follow? You're home. You know, you're busy running around every day and you come home. The home is referred to as a maskan. In other words, a place of second, a place of peace. You follow me? Okay. Now we still with the, you know, like the concrete word second, because we're talking about concrete things, the sea and all of those things. So let's just stay there for a while with the concrete like things. You know, you have a lake, like that ocean lake, and now you see it's very peace, it's very calm and everything. If you take a pebble and you throw it into the sea, when it's so calm, or a lake, what would happen? You basically disturb the peace. And actually, when you throw the stone in, not only do you disturb the peace, but you see it has a ripple effect. So we really want peace and tranquility when things are calm. So in giving, what happens is you maintain, what do? You maintain that calmness. So just think about it as a lake that is completely calm and tranquil, and you want to maintain that particular tranquility. That's a concrete example. But now when Allah says, sakanul lahum, Allah doesn't refer to physical calmness, tranquility and balance. Allah is referring to a psychological condition within you. So if you're in turmoil, right, and you want to regain, psychologically if you're in turmoil, and you want to regain your balance, what do? You give. Right? But I want to get to the point which I'm going to mention, but I just want to take you through this. It might seem very academic, but I think it's very important. So we get through this quickly. So second is derived from the word sukoon, right? So we did the concrete sukoon, but now if you think of sukoon in the metaphorical sense, in other words, peace of mind or peace of self. We're not talking about the peace on the ocean or in the lake and so forth. When Allah says second, He's talking about peace of mind. In other words, you want to be cool, calm and collected. You want second. Okay. Now, what does it mean that you have second? Like psychologically, you come to me, I'm a psychologist, I do a test of you and I say, no, you in sukoon. What does it mean? It means that you're safe and you're free of fear. You see, because if you beset with fear, then what is your psychological state like? Cool and calm waters, or is it turbulent waters in turmoil? It's turbulent. Now, so this condition, you know, in Arabic, when you're not in a state of sakan, in other words, a state of peace and tranquility, that state is referred to as qalaq. Qalaq we translate as anxiety. But, you know, if I say anxiety, you might, what is that? But qalaq literally means kathratu taharruk, a lot of movement. You with me? So, al-ashya'u tu'rafu bi-addad, things are known by its opposites. What is the opposite of peace and tranquility? It's turmoil. What's the opposite of sakan? It is qalaq. Right? And Allah SWT knows best. So I'm still really by the point of what? I'm really by the point of when you give, Allah grants you sakan. And what we have discussed now on a concrete level and on a abstract level in terms of psychologically, what does sakan mean? What does peace mean? Now this is basically where everything comes together. And I quickly want to explain it to you before we go through this slide, inshallah, and then we take it from there. If we go back to this verse now, remember Allah is telling these three who remain behind that you did something wrong. What was the wrong? They didn't partake in the jihad. And in other words, they didn't spend where all the other Muslims had to spend. So they had to remedy that. Now when you do a wrong, what happens? It's like taking a pebble and throwing it into the water. Your peace of mind is disturbed. And I mean, we know that, don't we? It's like almost like sometimes, you know, you do something wrong. Let's say nobody finds out, but you still have to live with the sin. And that's enough of a punishment because it disturbs your peace of mind. You can't live with yourself. You with me? So now when you do something wrong, it impacts directly on your sakan. So did they do something wrong? Yes, they did something wrong. And as a result of them doing something wrong, what happens? Their peace was disturbed. But now what happens is, what do we want to do? We want to re-establish that peace. The water was calm, we threw a pebble in there, the water is now disturbed, and the ripple effect is still being felt. What do you want to do? You want to restore that water to calmness. And when I talk about water, I'm talking about yourself. Your psychological state. You want to return it to calmness. But before we look at how you must return it to calmness, I just want to do a further analysis in terms of what it means that you are out of balance. When you do something wrong, then the waters are disturbed. What does that mean? From another perspective, if you wanted to, when you do something wrong, a wrong really is when you start inclining towards the terrestrial. Now, terrestrial basically means worldly things. Just imagine you have a scale, everything is in balance. Now you do something wrong. What happens when you do something wrong? The scale goes this way and it's shaking a bit. So something wrong means that now you're doing a wrong thing and that wrong thing is pulling you towards this world. It is, I call it terrestrial. Like Jurassic Park, terrestrial beings, we terrestrial beings, we walk on the face of the earth. So when you do something wrong, you are pulled towards the terrestrial. And the moment you pull down this way, in proportion to that, you are drawn away from the celestial. You with me? So what you have to do now basically is, in order to return the balance, is you have to pull yourself away from the terrestrial and then automatically you're going to go closer to the celestial. You with me? That's really what you want to, that's really what you need to do. You did something wrong, you disturbed your balance, you want to re-establish a balance. When you disturb the balance, what did you do? You went towards the material. Now you have to pull yourself away from the material and go to the immaterial, to the immaterial. In other words, you want to go to Allah, away from the world. Now the best way to re-establish that balance, to pull away from the world and go closer to Allah, is to take some material thing that you have and give it away. Then automatically now you're moving away from the terrestrial and automatically you pull towards the celestial. And that is why when things are dimaka, on whatever level it may be, from my understanding of these verses, the most profound thing for you to do to get your peace of mind back is to give something in the path of Allah. Or to give of yourself, to do something nice. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, you upset your husband, or your husband upset you, right? So what happens is, they can say what they want to, you're not listening to you, but now they make you a cup of tea, and they bring it. And now you maybe inside you want to smile and everything, but you don't also give him, you don't give him a chance because he must have a hard time, right? The brother's smiling almost like he's married for 50 years, but I know he's not. So you're with me. Now, so you're with me. Giving is that very potent thing that recreates the balance and just pushes you more towards the towards the celestial. And I'll give you the last story now, and this is a unique story. So judging from the faces, I think you got the point of how potent giving is in terms of recreating that balance between the celestial and terrestrial. Right? You can maybe do other ways to reaffirm the balance, but the best way to reaffirm that balance is, well, don't you think that's an amazing point? I mean, really, it's like, I couldn't believe it, man. That although I started preparing late, for the Western, it's absolutely amazing if you think about it, man. This is a story which is completely unrelated to what we have, but the point, and I wasn't even thinking about it. Here was one companion of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a very famous and contentious narration, man, about whether the Prophet ﷺ asked a slave girl, Ayn Allah, where is Allah? And she says, Fis sama. She answers, Fis sama. Fi literally means in, sama means the heavens. So scholars have understood that differently. I don't want to focus on that point. I want to focus what led to her coming to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So she was a shepherd. And she was grazing her flock for a master now. A wolf came across the flock and grabbed one of the sheep. Right? So her master came to find out. And the master said that I'm a human being. Right? And I was cut up about my loss, like a person would be cut up of. But, right? I couldn't control myself. فَسَقَقْتُهَا سَقَّةً. So I slapped her. Are you with me? Now he slapped her. Is that a wrongdoing? He did something wrong. Now what happens is, his peace of mind is still intact or is it shattered? Is he in turmoil? He's in turmoil. Okay, I lost the sheep, but I didn't have to overreact like that. So in other words, he doesn't have sakan at all. So what does he do? It disturbs him so much. He comes to the Prophet ﷺ. And what does he want to do? He comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, "O Prophet of Allah, should I not set her free?" Look, intuitively, as a human being, his peace of mind is compromised. But as a remedy to it, what does he say? Remember, he's now become so terrestrial. And now because he's so terrestrial, he's like distant from the celestial. He wants to recreate that balance. And the first thing, he doesn't even have to think about it. He tells himself, look here, I must set her free. Because in setting her free, I'm going to re-establish that balance. And it's the optimum way of achieving that sakan, that sukoon, which is so important. So the Prophet ﷺ puts her through a test and ultimately says she's a believer, set her free. So maybe on that note we can stop. How do we set ourselves free in terms of acquiring that sakan, which for many is so elusive? Islam has a very simple answer to it. It says give. But give in what way? Give in a way that you consciously move away from the terrestrial. And in moving away from the terrestrial, you gain a proportionate proximity to the celestial. Subhanallah, that's absolutely amazing. May Allah grant us the tawfiq to make amal, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullahu khairan. We'll take a break for salah. There's also some refreshments outside. Does anybody know exactly what time the waqt of Asr enters? Okay, so Asr has been with us for some time. I would advise that perhaps we just get a quick bite to eat, pray salah, and then we return, inshallah, for the final 3 sessions. My last session, Mullah Muhammad's last session, and then Dr. Yusuf Patel will round things up for us. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.